What if all of ethics is empty and meaningless? What would that world look like? J.L. Mackie is my personal go to for moral skepticism. He comes at the end of a post World War II wave of non cognitivism, which mixes psychology and ethics together for a skeptical conclusion. He makes for a clearer version of moral skepticism that doesn't need to call human psychology into question. All of this is a dive into meta ethics, which isn't discussing what is right and what is wrong directly, but instead asking how we can justify that our ethics system is real in the first place. To start, moral skepticism is simply that there are no objective values. In this system, things like lying, stealing, murder, or rape are never objectively wrong. However, it is totally fine and often encouraged to claim that you don't personally support these things. The desired conclusion of this position is that all values are ultimately subjective. They have no objective reality, and we shouldn't pretend that they do. There are a few potential reactions to this. You can think that this is dangerous or threatening. You can think it's trivially true, or ultimately this is just all meaningless. Mackie says you should note your reaction and then hold on to it for a moment. We'll come back to this. There are many versions of moral skepticism, but Mackie is proposing something unique. To understand Mackie, we need to differentiate between the types of moral skeptics. First order moral skepticism concerns the culturally established morality, our moral language, moral reasoning, societal norms, things like that. Second order moral skepticism is objecting to the metaphysical content of moral claims. The first order guy is more likely to be making moral judgments of his own. Example, there's no such thing as men's clothes and women's clothes, and we shouldn't teach anyone otherwise. Notice it's still asserting a morality, but a different version. The non cognitive version of moral skepticism that was popular prior to Mackie is called emotivism, which calls into question the language in particular. When I say violence is wrong, they will reinterpret the language to say that I mean I disapprove of violence. Mackie doesn't think that we should question people's language, though, so he's not an emotivist. Most moral skeptics would claim to be skeptical in both orders. For the emotivist, we can't even talk about the metaphysical content because our own language is incapable of that. Mackie is only a second order moral skeptic, so he thinks that morality is imaginary even if we can have language attempting to reference actual moral content. Violence is wrong is making a real moral claim, but Mackie thinks it's objectively false. I cannot stress enough that Mackie is not a first order moral skeptic. He only identifies with the second order. How can this be? An example. What is a unicorn? First order and second order unicorn skepticism. It has 4 legs, looks like a horse, horn on its head, and magical. We might have first order disagreements about if you can drink its blood and it gives you temporary immortality, or if it just really loves the power of friendship. The second order question would be, do unicorns exist? And surprise, they don't. We can have an entire first order conversation about unicorns with all sorts of content and disagreements, even while admitting it doesn't exist in reality. So, back to ethics, Mackie thinks we can do the same thing here. We can discuss morality in all sorts of ways, and it's a real discussion with real content attempting to reference a real thing in reality. But does it actually reference anything? No. He calls this error theory. You can accept first order morality while still rejecting its ontological component. Statements like, your values are logically inconsistent, are a fine first order critique, but saying, to be logically inconsistent is inherently lesser, is a second order claim, and is precisely what Mackie thinks is automatically false. Anytime you try to make an objective truth claim about morality, you have always made an error. Does objectivity matter? It seems to for the greatest known ethicists. Mackie explicitly mentions Plato, Kant, and Sidgwick, but later also includes Aristotle, Clarke, Hutcheson, Hume, Price, and importantly, G.E. Moore. Objectivity matters for every single one of these philosophers, and Moore in particular argues for ethical non-naturalism. Mackie thinks that Moore is on the right track to support his own claims. We'll get back to that in a minute. Mackie presents 2 arguments in favor of moral skepticism, the argument from relativity and the argument from queerness. And no, it has no relation to the gay rights movement. It's just an older definition that means weird. The argument from relativity is relatively simple. See what I did there? Okay, I'm sorry. Moral codes vary from one society to another, from one time period to another, and there are even variations within groups. I've personally experienced people who got rich and then radically changed their political values for their personal economics, as well as a woman whose teenage daughter got pregnant and immediately became pro choice. These types of flip flops are, to Mackie, indicative that morality is not objectively true. His main example is monogamy, which means one sexual partner at a time. People approve of monogamy because they participate in a monogamous way of life, rather than that they participate in a monogamous way of life because they approve of monogamy. If we look at Burkina Faso, which has legal polygamy, the population, male and female, often thinks that it's normal and a blessing for a man to have multiple wives. This indicates that our most fundamental relationships have radical differences outside of our culture. The argument from queerness is unique to Mackie. The assertion is that objective values are weird. They are radically different than all the other sorts of objective things in the universe. Are they observable, verifiable, testable, or empirical at all? The distance of the Earth from the Sun, for example, is about 92 million miles. If someone were to say that it was only 91 million miles, we could observe, verify, and test this evaluation. Morality can't do this at all. How am I supposed to test better? So, objective ethics must be non-natural. Back to G.E. Moore. He says that ethics are non-natural, and we have a special faculty to see morality in an analogous way to our eyes seeing light. This is called intuitionism. However, Mackie writes that intuitionism merely makes unpalatably plain what other forms of objectivism wrap up. A special sort of intuition is a lame answer, but it is the one to which the clear-headed objectivist is compelled to resort. Mackie agrees that this is what ethicists need to do, but it's simultaneously the death sentence for objectivity. I like to imagine a scatterplot graph, where all the little dots more or less make sense and follow the same general theme. But then ethics makes a claim, and it's all the way over there. It's unlike anything else, and it would be regarded as an outlier. So, objective ethics is like an outlier under Mackie's system, and it belongs with other outliers, such as ghosts and Bigfoot. Remember how I asked you to hold on to that reaction? What do you think now? How would you explain your own ethical position to avoid Mackie's arguments? Or would you just embrace them? Our next video will be a famous pseudo-philosophical ethicist that is reacting against the moral skepticism, among other things, that was so popular in the mid-20th century. For now, thanks for watching.